Hey everyone, welcome to the ChainLinkGod podcast, where we break down the information asymmetry on all things blockchains, oracles, and smart contracts. Today, I thought it'd be kind of interesting if we had a bit more of a informal type conversation, more of a meta discussion about the current state of the crypto and smart contract ecosystem, kind of a meta reflection, so to speak. So what we've achieved in terms of tech and adoption, what are the real goals that we're actually trying to achieve, and have we actually achieved that, and kind of what we're thinking things will look like going forward. So to kind of help discuss and kind of see what the major trends are, I have on the crypto oracle with me today. How you doing?
Doing good. It's been a while, so nice to discuss the space since a lot has happened.
Yeah, definitely. Crypto moves at, I mean, one year in crypto is pretty much a decade in every other industry. So just a few months is an insane amount of things have happened. So I think just to kick things off, what's your primary take on the current state of the crypto and smart contract space?
So yeah, I wrote down. We discussed some of the things beforehand, and I wrote down some trends. So I will just start with the first one. I think right now, I would say we're in a state of limited innovation. And I'm gonna be at these points, I'm gonna be as honest as possible. And while some of them are, might seem a little negative, ultimately, you have to reflect on the honest state of the market to then grow from there. And I think all markets go in innovation where they have a lot of innovation, and then there's a lull for a little bit. I think with any tech trend this happens, but I think right now, what we kind of see, and we've seen this in many cycles already, is like we have one innovation, and then we basically have a bunch of forks or similar type projects that introduce like very minimal changes, or potentially you could say upgrades, or they're just changes. Like, for example, first you had like, well, I think even before that you had just like a bunch of currencies. You had like Bitcoin, then you had like a lot of like copies of Bitcoin, Litecoin and Purecoin, and all these different coins. And then you kind of had like ICOs where everyone wanted to create some type of smart contract application or some type of smart contract protocol. And so you just like, everyone was raising money just based on a white paper and the fact that you're doing ICO. And then, you had kind of like, okay, blockchains, we have a new blockchain, and that was the kind of innovation. Oh, we made it a little faster, or we did this and that for it. And then you had kind of this DeFi wave, where you had all these different DeFi projects, and now you've kind of had NFTs, and I think NFTs are still kind of going, but we're kind of like, okay, what's kind of next? And I think like with dApps in particular, like the innovations are like, hey, we launched a new chain. Well, it's not really an innovation. Let's just say we launched lending on this new chain because it wasn't on this chain so far, already. And or the innovation is, oh, we have a slightly different governance structure, or we have a slightly different reward structure. And then like sometimes the innovation is, hey, we got a new token and we're giving away free money. I mean, that's like, I wouldn't say it's innovation, but that's the selling point. I think you actually, I liked what you said the other day. We had talked about it before, is like, your economics model is not a product. I think you said something, you said a few other things about it. What was it exactly? It was like,
Yeah, it was pretty much like subsidized yield is not a product. Tokenomics is not a product. Having a narrative is not a product. Like these are all things that kind of reinforce what your actual product is. But when you say like, we have this token, it rebases and does these things, it's like, that's a nice property of a token. But if there's no actual utility with the token, it doesn't mean much. I kind of see what you're saying in terms of like an innovation comes out, it gets forked, it gets hammered into the ground until it's like the smallest resemblance of what was still the original concept being played out. I kind of think of it as like metagames, pretty much. Like every so often, a new metagame comes out. I think DeFi Summer in 2020, that was like, that was kind of the first time I really stepped into a metagame, and it was basically boiled down to you deposit some tokens, you get free tokens. People speculate on those tokens, yields go up, that attracts more people to deposit their tokens to earn more tokens. And like in my mind, ever since then, and continuously, crypto is, it's like very inward facing. The crypto economy is about what we could do with these token things. Like I can lock a token to generate a new token, which allows me to earn more tokens on the previous tokens that I locked up. Because it's very, how can I earn tokens and generate a system that generates me more tokens? Is new value necessarily being created? I mean, we're basically printing money at this point, printing these
There's
tokens that people speculate on. It's just kind of very recursive.
Yeah, it's basically a rehypothecation of assets over and over again, which is basically the system that we were trying to get away from to some degree, which is, ironic in and of itself. But I was gonna say too, like, okay, so I think a lot of the innovation lull right now is actually in dApps. I think a lot of the actual real like exciting innovation is actually happening more in the infrastructure layer, and that's with blockchains, with L2s, with oracles. So I think and then that will enable more applications in the end, which is good. Like fast L2s and faster blockchains will enable high-speed applications, and oracles they can really enable all types of things. If you think of something like Deco that can attest to sensitive information, that could open up a lot of different applications. So I do see in cross-chain as well as kind of the infrastructure layers, coming about. So I think that's where the innovation's happening, but the dApps is where the innovation is struggling a bit. And
I think the main reason there really is like a lot of like at the app layer, we've kind of already built a lot of the primitives. Like we have lending, we have trading, we have derivatives, like we have these kind of base layer things. And right now there isn't a lot of new like financial primitives. Like I think the latest one really was like flash loans. That was like a brand new thing. We're still kind of playing in the algorithmic stablecoin type game. I think the main thing is blockchains in their current state just cannot scale, at least not scale while retaining the same properties that we care about. And so a lot of the more innovative use cases aren't necessarily possible yet. So everyone's attention is kind of focused on the big issue right now, the elephant in the room of like, how do we scale these chains? And so that leads to kind of the speculation of the L1 rotation, hopping from chain to chain, say who solved the problem, where can we actually do these things? But every time a new chain pops up, it's generally the same primitives that come along. And so I agree, there's not so much innovation there. It's really focused on the infrastructure. And hopefully, as the infrastructure is refined, we can actually enable these new applications. But currently, infrastructure gets the premium because that's what everyone's focused on as of today.
Yeah, and I think, well, like you said, they do need to scale, but I also think there is a challenge with how do we get these into users who actually want these services. I think right now most of these products are in the hands of people who simply want to speculate on the service becoming valuable, as opposed to people who actually use the service. And that's kind of like unfortunately, like where we're at now. And I have some ideas I'll talk about when we talk about kind of where this is heading. But I think that's one of the main issues. But again, that's also coupled with the fact that these things can't quite hit scale yet, which is just, that will improve. And I wanted to say too that that it's not necessarily surprising that we're in innovation lull. I mean, this is just how tech cycles play out. I think for one, I don't know if there's enough people who really know how to use the tech just yet, to be honest. Like I don't know how, if people really think like dApps especially know how to build business models off of this just yet. Some part of that maybe there's not enough users, but I think especially like if we move outside of finance, like how do you build insurance applications? How do you build supply chain applications that make sense? So I think that's one area, because I do think the economic model for dApps is a bit harder than infrastructure. There are different challenges there. Second, I think I've talked about this on Twitter several times, is the opportunity to make quick money is very attractive. So if you are a developer, to build a long-term application, versus to launch some new, shiny thing with a little bit of a narrative, and you can make a lot of money, it's very attractive and lucrative. And the barrier to entry for forks is just very small. So you don't have to be a creator so much. You just have to be a savvy enough to copy and create a narrative. And also most of the really good devs that actually could build innovative things, well, in the smart contract land, they're already rich. Like they already have a lot of money. And one of the problems is, how to, like, this is changing, but like you need basically an influx of new people that are very capable developers and maybe didn't get rich already to kind of come in and drive the next cycle, because it's, or you need people who are, they've already made so much money that they just want to actually change the world. And that's what drives them, as so I think that's a little bit of a challenge there.
Yeah, I think the big thing is like the incentives for developers is a little bit broken right now. Like if you want to build an application that's going to serve a billion people and will take like 10 years to actually build out, most of your user base existing today honestly just don't give a shit about that. If you're not going to give them 20% yield on their algorithmic stablecoin, they don't care. Like they want the yield now, they want to get free tokens, and they want to move on to the next thing that gives them the next shiny free yield. And like if that's not your focus as a developer, you're inherently at a disadvantage. So it's like the selection model for what projects get people, what gets people's attention, what succeeds, and in many people's eyes, unfortunately, success is just number goes up. If number goes up, you kind of end up trading this cult. We've kind of seen this kind of a broader point, but kind of like a cult of personality, where some developer will have an interesting new concept. They'll give you lots of yield. Then people kind of rally behind him. Then he makes some more questionable moves, and then everybody just ditches him. And then since nobody's propping up the subsidized yield, then people just don't really care anymore. And it's a very vicious cycle, but it comes down to like just the incentives are broken. Like it's very nice to give people free yield, but they'll turn your back on you when you don't give them that free yield anymore. And at the end, what product did you create? It varies, but often it's just the yield was the product, which is not a real product.
And it's totally unsustainable. It's tough. Like I said, this plays right into like real projects have to compete in an unrealistic environment, and and what's rewarded, is fast, quick money, no long-term vision, give away all your money. Like it's really, there's a couple of misaligned incentives. First, the team gets all this money up front, and they haven't actually achieved anything. Now there are some benefits to that and some not. We've discussed this token model can be beneficial to some degree, but again, they get a lot of money up front. Also, like there's no like short-term investing, and there's no loyalty in this game at all. And I mean, should there be, should there not, but it's like, if there's no loyalty, then everything's just going to become basically like, what can you do for me right now? And there's no long-term vision. It's like Wall Street kind of 2.0. It's all speculation as opposed to what it was, at least what people built it up to be. But I think this kind of goes into the next point that I had was like, crypto is still honestly a very niche market. It's really just kind of, in my opinion, at least, it's like, I don't know a number, but you could say a few million enthusiasts, or maybe it's a little bit higher than that. And you have some funds, but we haven't really reached wide adoption at all. You could maybe say in NFTs have reached a new kind of realm of users, but they're still just like speculating on the same things, which I find the NFT market just insane, to be honest. Like you have literally just JPEGs that are like stored in some centralized server, and somehow they're selling for like 20, 30, 50, Girox sell for like $1 million. Like it's just like insane to really, when you really actually think about it. And it's just like that meta game is honestly the wildest one of all. Like the ICO one at least makes a little bit more sense, because like, oh, well, this smart contract protocol could maybe generate a valuable service and this, but the NFT market is just like really insane. And
I think like you kind of hit on a point, like NFTs, I think that's like the prime example of the state of the market we're in, where these projects will pretend to have a utility, but most of the time don't. And it's in this state where there's kind of a facade of like, oh yeah, we care about the artists, we care about the art, but like 99% of people are in there because they want to buy an NFT and sell it at a higher price to another person. And that's the NFT marketplace. And so it's like that predominant profit maximism is something where it's like the utility that can be generated by NFTs is just not being expressed in the current marketplace, where it's everybody speculating on what other people are going to speculate on, and people watch what the big speculators speculate on, because it's kind of like a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop. I mean, I don't think a lot of people, kind of OGs in the crypto ecosystem, really saw NFTs coming because they were actually focused on like financial freedom, censorship resistance, and then like here comes these JPEGs that people put as their profile picture, and it's kind of came out of left field. But I think it's like the perfect example of like the metagame that the real world utility. Ironically, that's what people see as kind of crypto these days is NFTs, and not so positive light, specifically with the ESG concerns. But I think it's like a prime example of the current state of the market we're in, where people pretend like you're speculating on utility, but you're just speculating on speculation, really.
Well, I will say that the NFT market, I mean, it's basically, well, it's making money, obviously, but like I guess you could say the actual utility is social clouds. Whether I don't really care about that, but you know, like, yeah, that's basically what a lot of people, I think it's like, hey, I'm one of the few people who got a rock. I mean, that's basically the value proposition, and that's fine if that's the value prop. Like, that is at least a value prop. But again, like, it's just like insanely out of control. Like, no one actually thinks that like some of these NFTs should be selling for like $20,000 when it's like a picture of a fucking cat, or I don't know, some, like, it's just like totally I just find it insane. But
Yeah, I
to
think
each their own.
that's the primary thing. It's like the utility of NFTs isn't necessarily the question. It's just like the scale of the ecosystem, the speculation is just it's so out of sync of reality at this point. Like there's interesting NFTs and I have some, but it's just like the hype around it is just absolutely insane. Where it's like not necessarily saying it's a bubble, but it's just like you look at the market and it's like what the fuck is happening at this stage?
I also think, I mean, I'm not the typical NFT person to like appeal to. So like I'm gonna have, I know I might not always have the best take, but I do think that with NFTs, because they represent kind of social clout at the moment. Now I think NFTs will evolve, but again, this market is not really for this other market. Like there might be two different types of markets. Like you have like NFTs for real world assets, but that's kind of besides this. But since NFTs represent kind of social clout, like I think that they won't really hold value. Like I think honestly, I know some people think, well, they'll be like, relics of the culture, like artifacts of the culture. It would always, a punk will always be valuable, and that may be true. But I think that pool will be way, way more limited than you think. And I even question whether it will hold over the long term, because culture changes very fast and clout changes very, very fast. And will those actually hold value? So will it just be a constant game of what's hot now? And if that is, and people catch on to that more and more, you will see less and less speculation over time, because people will get out quicker and quicker and quicker. And then eventually that's how speculation bubbles kind of die, until eventually like people like speculate less and less. Like, they sell earlier and then there's just like nothing left. And so I do think that will play out. But furthering kind of on the the niche market, I mean, I think you do see some enterprises, but I think mostly they just have very small allocations to like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or they're like provide a service to the market, like a basic service right now. Like maybe they run a node, maybe they Google, like they show a bunch of blockchain data that different metrics on blockchain data. So right now they kind of, I think mostly I do think they are coming, but I think they kind of like in between the proof of concept phase and, okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to attack this market? And I think, within this market right now, that I've said this before, there's two markets. There's the fundamental market, which I would say like, your blue chips, and then you have the casino. and most people, I would say the casino dominates the market right now. And really the casino is a meta game, as you said, of rotation. It's and add 5 O's on I'm rotating. Like it's what is hype right now, and and then just rotating money. So I don't think you're actually getting a lot of new money into the space just yet. I think you will, but I think it's mostly a lot of the same money. A little bit more comes here and there slowly, but it's mostly a game of rotating. And I think the reason behind that is that most people view crypto as a lottery ticket. Like they heard from their friend got rich, or they read on an article that some person got rich, and there aren't a lot of ways to get rich fast in the world. Like crypto is like almost singularly unique, and like you can make a lot of money really fast, and people just, that's so lucrative that like the only thing they think about with crypto right now is like, how can I hit the jackpot? And I'm willing to lose money, but I want a chance to maybe hit it big. And then like that's what it fuels, like the dog coin memes. That's what fuels the NFT memes. It's like, how can I try to like hit a lottery ticket? And so that's why you get Ponzi-nomics that are rewarded, and that's what makes the space kind of look like a joke to some, is that yeah, it's based much more on lottery hype as opposed to like actual services. And
I think that kind of gets into like a broader point of like there's crypto currently has a bit of a perception problem in terms of whether that's going to be people complaining about ESG and the energy consumption. Whether that is or isn't an issue doesn't really matter. It's the perception that this is an issue that prevents a lot of people from touching it. I mean, even at all scales, whether it's just like somebody on Twitter or it's Tesla stopping Bitcoin payments because the ESG concern raised by the crowd. I do agree. I think a lot of the perception is like, oh, crypto, it's just a big Ponzi system. And it's because a lot of people do see it that way. They see it as their personal money printer. If they can jump in and they could just hit that next 10x, then they don't care where crypto actually goes. They just want to go in, capture value. And the people within the crypto ecosystem, I think a lot of people understand that dynamic. And so when there is money flowing in, I've kind of seen this analogy where it's like PvE or player versus everyone, where the existing players are basically just fighting to get the money from the new entrants. But when we're in this stagnation period and there's less money coming in, and it basically ends up shifting to PvP or player versus player, where everybody's kind of fighting over the same money. And so like there isn't necessarily value creation. It's just the pool of money inevitably is shifting and concentrating to the few winners. And then a lot of people get wrecked. And then that perpetuates the negative perception again of like, people thought crypto was this money-making thing. Here's all these people who just got wrecked, and when people's perception of crypto is just, it's a way to make money, that's not sustainable. And that's, I think, one of the perceptions we have to kind of break away from, where it's not just a system, it's not just a casino for profit maximalists to kind of hype up and dump their bags on people. It's actually a useful system that has economics attached to it. But I don't think the tokenomics and the Ponzonomics should be the current focus of the ecosystem like it is right now. Just ways to generate new tokens and make new tokens. That should be, oh, by the way, here's this tokenomic system we have, but our real product, is, stability or something. But it's completely backwards. It's here's how you can make some money. By the way, we have stability stablecoin too. Like it's just backwards.
It's tough too, because if you like, if you want to see like the ton of the tech play out, you're it's like, oh well, you're against making money, and it's like, like also you might have to give some, you might have to you're sacrificing, I guess, a little. If you don't play the game, well then are you what is the opportunity cost for you? Then are you actually losing money? But then if everyone thinks like that, then like the space basically has no real purpose, has no real ethic, has no real like everything that you would want to, you could achieve with blockchain, you're not going to, because everyone's just concerned with making a quick buck. And it's like, well, but if that's just the way the space is, well then why should I miss out? It's like, it's a very tough, you almost need like a lot of people just to lose, honestly, to the point where they're like scared to like invest in stupid shit. That's like, I don't know, some of the only ways I see it, or it's just like, yeah, over time more and more people just sell quicker and quicker, and yeah, you just can make less and less money, and then fundamentals take over. I mean, you might have that just in cycles where fundamentals take over for a little bit, and then Ponzi's come in and then they go away, and then you go into a lull for a little bit. I mean, that's sometimes how market cycles just naturally play out.
I will say that like the speculation aspect it's not 100% bad. The money that comes from speculation can provide a lot of funding for real actual development. If there was zero speculation, it would be really hard to build anything useful. It's just kind of the allocation of where that speculation goes can be a little disconnected from where the real value is actually being created. So I do agree that like if you're not like 100% profit maximalist, and it's like, quote unquote, you're in it for the tech, that's like a code word for just being a bag holder and you lost a lot of money. But I think that realistically, we should be focused on creating useful tech and then profiting from that, not the goal of creating profit. And then also maybe we create some useful tech, but that doesn't really matter. So I think it's kind of a framing thing, but I do agree that's like, it's kind of dichotomy of like, do you want to be right or do you want to make money? And that's kind of the choice you have to make currently.
Bro, are you just like coping, man? Like sounds like you're just like coping.
Yeah, have fun or stay poor, right?
I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's a very it's kind of frustrating, but it's a hard it's not an easy dynamic to get away from. But I mean, like at the end of the day, like what are we? I mean, depends on what you care about, I guess. If you want to see the world burn and all you want to do is make, if you think the world's going to burn already and you just want to make money, I mean, I guess that's one mindset. But you know, there is, I mean, we're all excited for blockchain tech for a reason. I mean, it does have a lot of potential. Both, you know, it could be used in a lot of good ways, could be used in a lot of bad ways. But you know, so like, you know, why not try to make some money, but also see it actually do some good things in the world? You know, it's kind of my mindset. But I guess, you know, I had a few more trends. These are, you know, those were kind of the main two. But like, you know, I do think I want to touch on this a little bit more in the future aspect, but I do think we're in the very early stages of political jockeying between the current system and the crypto system, and this is basically a negotiation that's happening of how, you know, how those two worlds going to merge. You know, what is crypto going to become? Like how this will answer questions like how important is decentralization to the adoption of these applications? You know, what is KYC and what's not KYC, and what happens to non-KYC type products? You know, what about self-hosted wallets and privacy? You know, what about taxes? You know, I think all of these are all what are being jockeyed over at the moment. And we can go more than that. It's kind of the future thinking of crypto. But, you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I definitely see that playing out more and more right now.
Yeah, I think crypto at this stage, it's kind of become a system where it can't be ignored. It seems like a lot of the focus is on stablecoins. You know, the fact that there's hundreds of billions of stablecoins out there and the quality of them vary by a lot. And so I think it seems like it's a little bit favorable, but at the same time, it's kind of questioning the legitimacy and the backing. So I think that there are some legitimate concerns of like systemic issues, but I think at this stage, it's kind of debating of like, how much control should the existing status quo governmental have, and how much should the control be kind of given back to the user and completely self-hosted? And I think we can kind of step on this in the future facing section, but I think there is a kind of a solution to be made.
So the other thing, so 2 quick points. The other one, if you look at the tech, you know, I really think, I mean, obviously there's a few things you could mention, but I think like the main thing that's happening right now is scalability. And who is going to be that first solution that has real services in a very scalable manner? So you can see this with the L2s, you can see this with these, you know, these high speed blockchains that are, you know, coming in. And so I think this is really the battleground right now for, you know, and I don't know if this will come down directly to just like who has the best tech. It's like who, I think a lot of it's to be business development, is who's going to get the most who's going to get the most applications, the most users on these, and who's going to hit like, who might hit like a really mainstream adoption app or something on their chain. Like, I think it's going to come down more to that, because you could probably build all these on all these different chains. And honestly, a lot of retail users, I don't know how much they care about decentralization. I mean, they should, eventually they'll have to, I think, at some degree. And you would hope that the most essential, the most secure one wins. But, you know, it's really going to come down to who's going to hit those killer apps and get the most users on their particular chain.
The larger, like we're definitely seeing, you know, the thesis of the multi-chain ecosystem was just a thesis, but now it's like it was played out over 2021. We could see it's clear now. I think the primary reason is, like you said, it's Ethereum mainnet itself just got bottlenecked and congested and kind of priced out users. So naturally they had to go somewhere else. And so that's kind of why we saw so many of these other chains pop up. I think that a playbook ended up being created and now is just being repeated at Finium in terms of you fork Ethereum, you tweak some parameters, add a couple new things, you deploy a token subsidy on top of it, you fork some Ethereum dApps, You get some users over, they speculate on the tokens to increase yield and attract more users. And then eventually the chain either just becomes more centralized or becomes congested and expensive, runs into the same problem as Ethereum. And then people move on to the next chain that doesn't have that issue or has a new shiny different thing that the previous chain didn't have. But I think that's just kind of the state that we're living in terms of there's all these chains, they have some differences. Are they huge differences? Maybe, but I think, there is user demand for cross-chain. And so I think what we've kind of seen is these cross-chain bridges, a lot of them have popped up, but I think the existing infrastructure simply cannot provide the level of security that users need at this point. I think like these cross-chain bridges started out with like $1 million in TVL, and it was fine. It worked between, 1 and 2 chains, but now they're connecting like 10 different chains. They're securing billions of dollars and going to be securing more and more. And we've already seen billions of dollars lost in bridge hacks. There's kind of speculation like, oh, things are going to be more isolated. Things will become more multi-chain, less cross-chain. I think the demand for cross-chain isn't going away. I just think that the existing bridge infrastructure just has not been there yet. So this is kind of like a future-facing one, but bridges getting hacked has been kind of a theme for the past couple months of unfortunate reality, but I don't think that's going to kill the multi-chain cross-chain narrative. I think that's just the current state of bridge technology is just not adequate yet.
Yeah, I would agree. Obviously, I think the security of bridges is like so important, and I think a lot of teams that just want to get quick to markets, and they want to solve an immediate problem, and so which that's just happens in the market. But again, you could see, especially as you see cross-chain being like a gateway for funds or institutions to like interact with all these chains. Like, we got all this money, we want to interact with these chains, we want to give our users access to these chains through us. That's, you're talking about securing trillions and trillions of dollars, and you can't just like being first to market is not going to be why you win. It's going to be like how secure you are. And so I think when you look at something like CCIP and you see the amount of, you got guys like Dan Bona and stuff working on it, and this guy's arguably one of the top cryptographers in the whole world, and so that's the kind of security you're going to need. But the last point I had on the current one is I do think that Bitcoin has kind of really established its first real kind of real world use case with the Ukraine-Russia situation, and that it for the first time, it was like really seen as an alternative that you can turn to when the existing, financial system basically relegates you from it. And it really became a political tool, I guess you could say, to use if that happens. And that has a lot of ramifications about how, the current world order. I think Arthur Hayes wrote a pretty good article, in my opinion, on it. But I think it's really like, okay, Bitcoin is actually now a serious reserve asset that's actually very important to the geopolitical game that goes on in the world. And so I think this is really one of those defining moments that really like catapulted that narrative.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people kind of historically just kind of saw Bitcoin as like, oh, it's that pet rock thing. But I think particularly with the financial censorship in multiple different domains, whether like canceling a central bank's fiat reserves entirely or just individuals who lean a specific way, I think that people will begin to, or are beginning to kind of recognize the censorship resistant properties of Bitcoin as a real alternative to fiat assets cannot be understated. I think before people go like, oh yeah, Bitcoin was digital gold, but they didn't really know what that meant. And I think at this stage, they'll begin to realize, oh, it's unconfiscatable censorship resistant asset. Like, I think that's only going to become more and more clear going forward into the future. So, I mean, I think that's kind of Bitcoin's domain. I don't think any other crypto is kind of necessarily going to capture that market than Bitcoin, but that's not to say that's the only market to be captured. I think that's just kind of Bitcoin's main foray here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I know the whole argument of, well, ETH has more utility and honestly probably has better economics. And I believe that to be true. But I think Bitcoin, particularly, well, for two reasons. One, I think it's just momentum and and kind of just people believing in this narrative that it's like a reserve asset is, it has a lot of momentum in that regard, and it's going to be very hard to unseat that. And second, that they are so trust minimized in governance, like they like it just doesn't change. It's so ossified, and that is really, if you want to be a reserve asset, that's probably the most important property actually. Yeah, you might not get the tech stuff, and yeah, you're gonna have, they're gonna have to think about the security budget. That's going to be a very big thing. I don't think that's going to be a concern, might not be a concern for 8, 16, maybe a while out, but it is going to be something they're going to have to consider if they don't like make substantial changes to the protocol, like maybe like zero knowledge, like being able to compute zero knowledge proofs. That would actually probably be a big thing, and then they can build layer 2s on that. But yeah, I think it's gonna be very hard for Ethereum to unseat that. But like you said, like they don't have to be like, they can be both just as valuable, or maybe even Ethereum could be more valuable, but it's not like the world reserve asset. Like they don't, this doesn't mean like one's better than the other, or that they have to directly compete in that regard. They can actually both be reserve assets at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think Bitcoin's very much optimizing for predictability. You know what Bitcoin's going to be like in 10 years, and that's really why you hold Bitcoin. Ethereum may objectively be evolving to have better economics, but it's also a little less predictable and malleable, and that's a strength, but it's also, a different value proposition than Bitcoin altogether. So I think that this is kind of an analogy by Arthur Hayes as well, but I think that like Bitcoin's much more of like a fixed commodity like gold, while Ethereum is going to be seen much more from the perspective of being a bond or the revenue it generates and the utility in the Ethereum ecosystem. Bitcoin is just going to be kind of the value proposition is Bitcoin itself, its supply, and that you can't change it no matter what. Ethereum is just going to be more malleable and flexible by design, which has many advantages in terms of its utility. But the ossification is something that's just not guaranteed or really seen at this point. So I do think that like they're both gonna, either one, they're gonna have a role to play if they actually achieve their goals. So I think we've discussed a lot about like the current crypto ecosystem and the smart contract ecosystem in its current state, a little bit about the future. But I think now we can really shift towards what is the ecosystem going to look like going forward? How is the space going to play out adoption wise? What are your kind of main thoughts there?
So yeah, again, I wrote down some points, but the first one I think is that crypto is just going to get increasingly political. I think again, there's a lot of, because the property that blockchains and cryptocurrency provide is kind of this trust minimization at the end of the day. Whether that's trust minimized money, whether that's trust minimized applications, and this is going to be seen like, if the system is going in the wrong direction and you have the alternative, well, the people in power are not like gonna necessarily like that if they don't control that, if that makes their system look bad, even though like especially when you're trying to cover up how bad it is, and so it is going to be a lot of, like I said before, a lot of political jockeying over it. And so like this jockeying is going to be like, well, how much regulation is there going to be? How legal are certain things going to be? And so what I worry about is, obviously I have more of a, like, I would love if people would take personal responsibility for their assets and personal responsibility over things. And so you would have, it's more of like a, I don't know, libertarian type of view, I guess. Not that I'm a libertarian or whatever, just like it would be nice if people could take personal responsibility. But I don't think I don't think most people want that, or they don't care enough about that. And so that kind of introduces a lot of intermediaries into that system, and then that also introduces a lot of creates less trust minimization as a whole. And so I worry that we will not have the political will to get this kind of larger vision fully how we want. So it might be a watered down version, unfortunately. And I really worried about like KYC stuff. If everything becomes KYC'd, it, I there's did we really realize the vision of crypto? And then will non KYC stuff just be like relegated to underground? I could see that happening. So I don't know. I mean, you already saw South Korea, they want to ban unhosted wallets. Like, I don't know. I worry about whether we actually have the political will to change things. But again, that could change as like things break down, like if financial system breaks down, these next people might want a bit more demand for these kind of things. But
I think what we'll probably end up seeing is that the existing ecosystem is going to be basically split. And I think there will be an ecosystem that's a little bit more on the wild side where the KYC, AML, and the kind of existing assumption that there's always going to be an intermediary to click the pause button. I think that system will kind of exist in parallel and will be in a state where you can't necessarily control it. But I think what regulators and what enterprises are going to shift towards and really focus on is kind of this parallel system of like the same infrastructure, but it's going to be a little bit more permissioned, and it's going to have, maybe it'll have KYC, but it'll be in a way that's more privacy preserving to try and pull people back into that ecosystem. And so I think it'll end up kind of just split. There'll be two systems. I think there'll be bridges between the two. If you are in the KYC kingdom, then you can use the non-KYC, but maybe not vice versa. And so maybe that's, it's almost like a chain split, basically a chain split that may or may not resolve itself. So I think, unfortunately, that's probably what's going to end up happening. I think there's still a level of compatibility and interoperability between those two, but I think that's probably the most realistic route where people kind of opt into the system they want to use.
Yeah, I think there'll be a campaign against non-KYC stuff eventually, unfortunately. But this kind of goes into my second point, though, is I think that access to smart contract applications, access to cryptocurrency will evolve into, instead of users interacting directly with the blockchain or directly with the applications, which right now is honestly just complicated and not very secure for most people. Like, to go to MetaMask and to use your hardware wallet, and if you fuck up, there's not really anything, you could lose all your money. You have to worry about your systems being hacked or whatever. Like, for most people, in all honesty, like, they can't handle this amount of responsibility. And the UI is just not just the UI, but the security. Like, what if you lose your keys? And it's just not there. And so maybe this is just the way it goes forever, or maybe this is the intermediary step. But I think that existing institutions will act as the intermediary to these applications, to cryptocurrency. That's just, they're just going to be basically gateways there. So, they have customer service. They can abstract away a lot of these details. They can maybe provide you insurance. They can make sure you don't mess up and lose all your money. Maybe they provide insurance in case they're hacked. They provide all this kind of for you. And also, back to the point I said before about users, like, they are the ones that have all the relationships with users now. And so they can actually provide all these, they can actually be how we get all these, these applications into the hands of actual users that actually want those services. And so I think what will probably happen too is kind of like what you said, is that they will offer services that are like, like similar to how they have messaging apps where you say like, secure to secure encryption. So like, you have on the back end, it uses this kind of encryption protocol where a bank or something, say a bank is offering a lending service, and it could be like secured by DeFi or whatever, something secured by blockchain. And so like you get like certain guarantees behind it, because they're offering you a product that has a back end built on blockchain. Whether you get all the full guarantees, I don't know, but you probably will, at least maybe you will get some determinism and maybe some transparency that you didn't have before. Now, is that the full vision? Maybe not, but I do think you'll get a little bit more insight. So, unfortunately, whether that's, whether you like that or you don't, I think that's probably what will happen.
Yeah, I had the same point down. I think that's the most likely situation where we can actually scale crypto to like billions of people. I think expecting everyone to kind of manage their own private key and to interact with these websites. I mean, like if you've used DeFi, then you know that you may be used to the user experience. but it's very, very complicated. And so I think the vast majority of people just honestly don't really care about finance that much. They just want the benefits. They want to earn yield. They want to be able to invest their savings. They want to be able to pay for things. And I think that this is kind of like a predominantly DeFi type thing, but I do think it's going to be back end infrastructure. The UIs aren't going to change. The user relationships won't change. But now businesses can provide greater transparency. They could be more competitive. They could provide greater yield, and the switching costs between these businesses become lower because of the shared infrastructure and the kind of the shared, rather than just a huge fractionalized um, economic system where every business has their own system and there isn't that much interoperability. I think this will unlock a lot of fluidity between businesses. And so like maybe a lot of the benefits will be realized by businesses first, and then some of the benefits trickle down to the users. But I think, at the end of the day, the users still have a better experience than they did before. And if they want to use crypto manually and get all the benefits directly, I think they'll always have that option as well. It's just that most users, they just don't necessarily care. And so I think most people, that's how they'll use crypto. They won't even realize it because it'll be a backend thing. People don't think about when they connect to a website, oh, is this hosted on Google Cloud, or is this like, I mean, I only want to use a server that's hosted by Microsoft. Like people don't care. They just want to use something that works. And so at the end of the day, I think that's really what's going to be the driving force is business integrations. But that kind of comes down to the point of regulatory clarity where most businesses today can't even touch crypto because they don't know what's okay and what's not. It's a huge landmine field, but we're not being told where the landmines actually are. So just they don't even step into it. Only the riskiest and like the most adventurous do at this stage. But I think that'll become more clear, and maybe it'll be a little more watered down, but that's how most businesses are going to step into crypto. So it's kind of like a back end revolution, really.
Yeah, I would hope. I mean, the hope is that, while that's probably what's going to be happen for most people, hopefully this alternative though still exists. Is not like completely demonized to the point where it's like some underground market. So you actually have the alternative of holding your own assets, and hopefully then that slowly it will take time, lots of time, but hopefully that market can slowly grow where more people want to do that. That's like kind of outside of, it's almost like an educational cultural revolution that would have to take place for more people to want to take self-ownership and things like that. But hopefully it's a viable alternative and it can grow over time.
I think the
That would be.
approach that a lot of protocols are taking is basically scale up and become so adopted that you become too big to fail. Where at that point, there's so many users and the network effect is so large that you can't just press the red button and kind of shut people out of the system if their lives already depend upon the system. So I think that's what a lot of, I feel like, protocol founders are betting on, is that you can't block people from accessing this, or there's kind of like a mini revolution that ends up happening because of that. Will that happen? It's hard to say, but I think that's what a lot of people are betting on. It just becomes too unrealistic to shut everything down.
Yeah, and I guess a few more of the points that I had was, this kind of furthers on the point I already talked about, how there being two markets, and I think this will further go in that direction. And I think what will happen, for better, or I mean, whether you like this or you don't, again, these are just what I think will happen, is that big big institutions, big whales, they will buy up these fundamental projects, because I think these will be like the digital infrastructure of the future. Like they will be like the cash cows of the future, when blockchain is basically a backend for a lot of things that we do. And then you will have this casino game that still goes on, and as you play this out over more and more time, a lot of the existing players then come to own a lot of the real estate that becomes the future of the economy, of social systems. And then people are like, oh, how did this happen? Well, this is how it happened. And so I think, unfortunately, I think that will happen. And I do think also speculation will, over time, more and more calm down. Like I said, I think, it's just a matter of like people selling earlier and earlier and earlier, so they can get ahead. I get that advantage by selling a little just before, and just slowly whittles down more and more. But I do think you'll also probably see some new things that will come out that are, we don't know what they are, and it'll just create new kind of meta games. But Yeah, that's kind of how I see the market unfolding more and more.
Yeah, I think that, we talked a lot about like how the existing crypto ecosystem is a little bit inward facing, profit maximalist type oriented, but I think it's almost like a necessary step of where we built infrastructure, and the current crypto natives are the first target demography. And so all of these initial use cases are very much crypto focused. It's kind of the initial product market fit. But I think that's kind of just, we're testing the infrastructure with these crypto token speculation games, but the infrastructure is infrastructure. And I think you could basically hot swap in the organic real world use cases, real world assets kind of being plugged into existing infrastructure. So these existing lending markets can plug into existing stocks and securities. DEXs can be plugged into basically tokenized real world assets. Like, it's the same infrastructure. It's just what it's being used for kind of expands in volume. So I don't think the speculation mania or the token focused, we have a new token system, is going to go away 100%. But I think just kind of proportionality, we're going to see more actual real world use cases, and the speculation casino game will be kind of like that weird corner. Like, it's not necessarily the prime main focus of crypto at that point. And I think there's a
It's
lot to
like
get to that point, but hopefully that is the goal here.
it's like penny stocks or like kind of Wall Street bets type, stock market betting. I mean, look, the reality of the day, like there's lots of Ponzi's and a lot of things, not just crypto. I mean, crypto is like the easiest to like, create new money and create these meta games, but it's not like they don't exist all over the world. And not like the US dollar is not kind of one big almost Ponzi in a way. Um, and like you said before, I didn't have this point down, but I do think the next avenue for DeFi is really two. It's real world assets coming on chain. I mean, that's like that'll bring a whole bunch of new money into the space. And then also, I think that you'll see enterprise offerings of DeFi as well. So beyond kind of the real world asset thing, I think one of the other things we'll see is we're going to see a consolidation. I don't know how fast that's going to happen, but I think as the kind of once you start to remove away free money, like you're going to get like, okay, who actually has the best product, and then as you consolidate around that project, you actually get network effects and economies of scale. I think you really get that in crypto. And so I think you will see a consolidation both in blockchains. Now I do think there will be, I don't think there's just going to be one blockchain. I do think there'll be multiple, but I don't think there's going to be like some people, there was this notion like maybe there'll be like all these individual dApp chains, and then it'll just be like thousands of blockchains. That was kind of like what Cosmos kind of was in a way. I don't think that's quite going to happen because of composability, and I think it's just hard to bootstrap security for all these individual chains. And I don't think that economically, I don't think you can actually do it. I think it's just like there's not enough money to be made for validating these things that you could keep the security up and do that. So I think you'll see consolidation, but where you kind of have like blockchains that have these shards or subnets or whatever. And so I think you will, I don't know, 3 to 5 systems maybe, and maybe you have some specific chains that are very good at like one thing, and you have this kind of modular blockchain, like if you say for example you have like Celestia, which is like like this data availability chain, like this is, I'm not saying that's going to win or not, or that's going to happen, but I'm just saying that could be like a specific use case that's very supportive of the blockchain ecosystem. So you could have potentially thing, and then I think besides blockchains, you will see a consolidation in dApps. So like lending will consolidate. I mean, you might even see like DeFi like that are like liquidity lending DEX like all in one. Like you might even see a consolidation to like a couple services in one. Like you might not be like just one or the other. So I because especially with liquidity, like there's a huge network effect if you have the most liquidity, and you can earn the most yield and you can get the best rates. So once we get past this kind of like all these competitors launching free money, and that dries up, I think you will definitely see network effects on in consolidation in these dApps.
Yeah, I agree. I think at like the infrastructure blockchain layer, I do think there'll be consolidation, but I think it'll be in the sense of basically like a power law distribution where a lot of that's going to be concentrated to just a small handful I think there will be plenty of DApp chains, significantly less secure, but for their use case for a gaming application, I don't think that that really matters. They just want the same kind of user experience. I think realistically, and this may be my own bias, but just kind of from a technical perspective, I think that a lot of what will be the multi-chain ecosystem will be basically a multi-rollup ecosystem where you'll have this Ethereum settlement layer. You'll have these different ways to store data, whether it's Celestia, storing it on Ethereum, or just storing it somewhere off chain. But I think the vast majority of these chains will just be different execution layers, different rollups. Some rollups will be layered on top of each other recursively to even lower cost further. But I think the vast majority of the ecosystem will be these different kind of modular execution environments that can compete with one another. But I think that this will be effectively, this will kind of lower some of the bridge risk. And I think that's, it'll kind of reinforce Ethereum. I think people will begin to see Ethereum less of like, oh, it's this really congested chain where like the whales kind of transact. And so it's basically the settlement layer where the multi-chain ecosystem basically settles upon. And I think that one kind of a greater, broader point, I think more people will begin to kind of recognize just the economic system backing Ethereum, where if you launch your own blockchain, you have to pay for that security. You have to find some validators. You have to basically bootstrap it yourself. If you launch a rollup, you're basically just outsourcing a lot of the infrastructure concerns, and you just need to have a handful of small, just a handful of validators in order to run your rollup environment. And then basically you're just going to be borrowing Ethereum security, paying a little bit of rent for that security, but you don't have to bootstrap everything yourself. So I think a lot of enterprises who normally kind of gravitated towards like, we'll fork Ethereum and create a permission chain. I think realistically, if they want to tap into the ecosystem, they'll launch their own rollup, tap into the security of Ethereum, and then set their own permissions and whatever they need on top of that. So it's kind of the infrastructure of blockchains themselves, I think, will also consolidate in terms of what blockchains look like, where you don't need to do everything yourself. You outsource consensus, you outsource data storage, and you can even outsource execution as well to a reliable set of nodes, which can take the form of Chainlink nodes. So realistically, you're just defining the parameters. You don't actually run the infrastructure. You just kind of say, this is a blockchain I need. I need these use cases. I need privacy. I need this level of scalability. I'm okay with this number of nodes. You just kind of do a one-click deployment. You have your environment. You can plug into every other chain through Ethereum or through bridges. And I think it'll be significantly simpler to launch a blockchain, but in a secure way. So I think that that's realistically where most of the ecosystem will go. And I think that kind of plays into a different narrative in terms of like, we touched on this before, but just like Ethereum's tokenomics. I think in terms of just the tokenomics where you have EIP 5059, where every transaction is burning ETH, plus you have the move to proof of stake, which will significantly lower issuance that's associated with proof of work, where the system itself will become net deflationary, which the value of Ether is the security of the Ethereum blockchain. So it's kind of a self-reinforcing loop, and you could tap into the system to secure your network. So as more systems tap into Ethereum, that's more Ether being burned. That's a more valuable Ether. That's a more secure network for your chain. So I think people begin to recognize this virtuous feedback loop. It's not here yet, but I think once people kind of recognize the impact of this, I think it'll be substantial in the way people just architecture a blockchain. I think it'll look very different than just we forked Ethereum, we made the blocks bigger, and now the blocks come faster. we beat Ethereum. I think that narrative will hopefully die out within the next couple of years of just playing with Ethereum rather than competing with it, is my own thesis.
Yeah, I would largely agree. I do think there'll be a few other ecosystems, maybe even just for specific use cases, or like there's even like a lot of major markets have a few people, or like at least you'll see like China will have its own chain or something like there will probably be a few, but I don't think there'll be that many. And I do think that Ethereum will be the dominant one, and agree largely with your thesis there. I mean, I think the network effects and economies of scale are really huge in blockchain, and obviously I think they're also the same in Oracle networks. You get like major advantages in that regard. But just two more points, and then we can finish with Chainlink. We can't do a podcast without talking a little bit about Chainlink at the end. But the other 2 points I had, which were kind of smaller points, but I do think you will see I think you're already seeing this, but you're going to see a mass migration of people who work in TradeFi, who work in traditional Web2 companies that are coming into crypto. I think for a few reasons. One, intellectually it's more stimulating for them. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you people have more of a there's a little bit more motivation because you feel like you're actually doing something, that's changing things for the better, or at least you're trying to. I think there's a lot of money in crypto as well to be earned for people in that regard. People are kind of and the work environment's a little bit different. It's not like very this corporate structure, at least a lot of them, I don't think. And so I think you will continue to see that, and I think this will have a few dynamics. Some may be positive, some maybe will be. I think you'll see a bit of a culture war. You already kind of saw that with the ENS thing, but with all these new people coming in, will they have the same vision of crypto as the early people? And what will how will that affect the space? Will there be a lot of infighting? I mean, this is part of like this isn't really necessarily a crypto specific thing. This is part of a wider cultural war that's going on, especially in the US, but it's going on in a lot of places, especially particularly in the Western world this is happening. But I don't think I think that's only going to intensify, and that will have different ramifications for how crypto is, what happens to crypto. But also I think it will introduce some more long-term focused people and people thinking about crypto in a different way, because they didn't get rich right away. And so like they might, and if speculation dies down a little bit, okay, I have to actually build a long-term project. So there may be some benefits in that regard of more long-term focused, more people, in it for a while because they're not already rich or whatever. And so I think this could have some positive effects as well in that regard.
Yeah, I think I just have a few more points as well. I think that I feel like most chains in the future are just not even going to touch proof of work at this stage. We're already kind of seeing this, but pretty much every chain is going to be proof of stake, not only because you can generate arguably higher security for much less cost because you don't have to subsidize electricity rather than using capital to buy hardware. You're just using capital and then staking that capital directly. So there's less of an abstraction. But I think in general, I think the big thing, whether it's actually an issue or not, is just in terms of the ESG type concerns, where a lot of businesses, a lot of people don't want to touch crypto, or people say, oh, I'm not going to touch NFTs because they burn down the Amazon, rainforest. I don't think their core argument is actually about energy. I just don't think they see the value in crypto, but I think ESG will always be a point that people are going to keep stabbing crypto with. And I think once Ethereum shifts to proof of stake, a lot of that buying power goes away. But at the same time, Bitcoin's never going to switch from proof of work. I legitimately don't think it ever will. And if there is a implementation that moves away, I don't think the Bitcoin community is going to recognize that as Bitcoin. I think the Bitcoin network will always be proof of work. It may not be at the same scale it is now, larger or smaller, but every other chain besides Bitcoin is going to move towards a proof of stake model. I think, there's questions around, okay, what about token distribution? Proof of work's really good at distributing tokens. Proof of stake, you need some kind of distribution initial mechanism. I think so that I don't think it's like a all perfect, but I think this will be substantial in terms of at least narrative. And then, yeah,
I was gonna say I pretty largely agree with that narrative. I do. Let me say I do think proof of work is quite a ingenious and secure solution, but unfortunately, with the current narratives I mean, whether right or wrong, I mean, I think there's some validity. I mean, it is a very wasteful. I mean, it depends on how you define wasteful. Let me first say that, because like if you're creating a really censorship resistant money, well, that's what's creating the censorship resistant is all that energy, and how valuable is that? Well, I would say it's pretty valuable, but again, you're basically like everyone's just guessing a bunch of numbers to see who can become first, and then so like a lot of that computation is it's just like it's not actually being used to do executions. It's just being used to guess numbers in the hopes that you will win this kind of lottery of proof of work. So it is wasteful in that regard. But maybe they'll move to renewables or not. So I wish I like proof of work, but I do agree that with the current narratives and with renewables and energy considerations and just that and the whole narrative around sustainability and all that, I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see any people going proof of work beyond Bitcoin. Yeah, I do think I don't think Bitcoin will ever switch to proof of work. Maybe they will move towards more renewable sources, or maybe there'll be less power, or I don't know. They'll have to consider too when the security budget becomes more a concern. I don't, like I said, it might not be for 16 years from now, but they will have to consider how that's going to work.
Yeah, I think in terms of proof of work, I think it's in my mind very overblown. There's a lot of stranded energy. I don't think people realize just how much energy is stranded and just goes to waste because they can't transmit it anywhere useful, or how much negatively priced energy exists. The just the transmission of energy is not that efficient. So you can really use crypto as a I don't remember the exact term, but like adjustable load system where you could basically use Bitcoin miners to bootstrap renewable energy because it provides consistent demand. It could be immediately switched off at any time, which could be incredibly powerful for basically balancing the power grid. And it's kind of interesting. Some places have recognized this. I know Texas has kind of made more of a move, and a few politicians have noted this regard. So I think there is positive narratives that exist with proof of work, but will that beat out, hey, look, Bitcoin consumes more energy than XYZ country? From a narrative perspective, it's explaining why proof of work bootstraps renewable energy is just harder than, wow, look at how much energy Bitcoin uses. That's a lot. So it kind of is what it is. I think you brought up a good point.
Can I
Go ahead.
just go to quickly say that? Yeah, I don't like you said before. I don't think it's actually so much about like energy, like in these people who are like have a very Elizabeth Warren, these people like that have a very strategic interest in I think more they have a very strategic interest in bringing down Bitcoin or controlling Bitcoin, or like particularly to protect their sovereign their fiat currencies. I think that's really the main thing. And Ethereum is less of a threat because it's more about smart contracts and stuff. And so I think I don't buy the outward facing narrative. So I mean, there are some truth in it, and I think there's some truth in it. And I think people do care about that, but I think a lot of people also just like kind of want to attack Bitcoin in a way, or they want to attack crypto and they want to control crypto, and the easiest target is Bitcoin and its proof of work. So it's like the easy target to then blanket all of crypto under.
I agree. I mean, it's you see it with Bitcoin where it's like top down, people attacking Bitcoin. They'll point at the energy, but really it's about, it's a money they can't control realistically. But it's also from the bottom up where people really don't like NFTs. They'll use energy as the reason why. But even if NFTs didn't use any energy, they would still say it's too much energy because it's not about the energy. They just think, well, there's a lot of reasons we already kind of touched on NFTs, but it's basically it's not about the energy. It's just a very easy to point to negative narrative that it's like a scapegoat basically. Whether it's an issue or not is not the point. It's that it looks like an issue basically. But I think in terms of like what could be potentially an issue, I think as the Bitcoin block reward basically continues to have every 4 years, I think people really begin to think about the long-term security of the Bitcoin network. Like, yes, there will be a block reward until 2140, but it's an exponential decay chart. So, within 20 years, it's going to be 96 or something percent less than it is today. So I think people will begin to really dive more into, is the level of issuance from Bitcoin enough to secure the chain? How much issuance does there need to be to secure the chain? How much energy consumption does there need to be for there to be, minimized amount of reorgs? So I think there's a lot of questions just about the sustainability of the Bitcoin network itself from an economic perspective. It's very predictable, but Ethereum's already kind of solved for this because yes, there's technically an unbounded supply of Ether because every block continues to mint the same amount, offset by burning. So Ethereum is basically set for the future in terms of security, but Bitcoin's just a fundamentally different model. So people don't see the concern today just because the subsidy is like well over 90% of the block reward. But over time, people are going to really question, what the network's going to look like in the future when the block reward actually goes to zero. So I don't necessarily have an answer here, and I just think people should be discussing it more before it's too late. But when that's an issue, depends on the price of Bitcoin. So who knows when that'll actually when push comes to shove in that regard.
Yeah, I don't want to. It's too far out really to really know, but I think I think there will be a choice between three options. You'll either add an inflation, which I think the Bitcoin community will not go for, but you have like a 1% per year maybe. Second, you add like like being able to verify zero knowledge proofs, which then allows you to support smart contract applications, and then you can create more user fees off that. Or it's just really expensive to use, and and everything kind of transitions to more like off chain or layer 2. So it's like this just super expensive settlement layer. So I think those are really I've seen all those argued, and so we'll see. I think it's too far out though to really know, because again, the price of Bitcoin goes up a lot, that could change. But again, that's a hard assumption, because like that could change, and so like it has to stay around that amount. And so I mean, I know the difficulty changes, but then it's like, okay, well, if it goes down too much, how much security is that into the network? And so yeah, I think it's a little bit too far out still, but anyways.
Yeah, I think you mentioned solution. It's basically either Bitcoin transactions just need to become really expensive, and either it's because only whales are making transactions, or it's because it's just like a zero knowledge proof, a ZK roll up on top of Bitcoin. I think that would be a very interesting solution. I think that a lot of Bitcoiners don't like the idea of basically generalized computation. I think they think that adds a lot of risk to a network, and it can, even if it's like in a layer 2 type situation. But realistically, the solution is that Bitcoin transactions become more expensive. What people do with that, layer 2, just transaction centralized exchanges, literally never move your Bitcoin, trade private keys instead. We'll we'll kind of see what happens there, but that's definitely like a future facing problem. So this is like, these are all things that we kind of expect to happen in terms of the future of the smart contract ecosystem, the crypto ecosystem. But kind of honing in on more the Chainlink side of things in terms of how Chainlink is playing into the current ecosystem, how it's playing into the future of the ecosystem. Well, what are your general thoughts of like the general kind of trends and notable things here?
Yeah, so I don't want to go too deep. Obviously, we've discussed Chainlink many times, but I think right now Chainlink is really in this kind of hyper growth stage, and it's basically trying. First off, I think it might be helpful first to say, like, what is Chainlink actually creating? Like what are they really going for? And I think if you look at it, it's really about creating this new type of computing environment. And I would call it trust minimized off-chain computation. And so you have kind of blockchain computation, you have like traditional Web 2 computation, then you just have this kind of middle ground. And really what this is perform computation off-chain in what would be a trust minimized manner. And maybe people who don't know what trust minimized means, it's like basically creating determinism where the code is so statistically high, the certainty that it will execute exactly as you intend it to. So I submit code and it will execute exactly as I think it will, as I submitted it, because I've designed the network in a way where I've eliminated the variables, or I've mitigated the risk of any external variables affecting it, like whether that's centralization, so the administrator can affect the code, or I don't input external variables per se, or or just a single source. So it's creating an environment where code can act deterministically. And I think so you have this, so with Chainlink, you have this computing environment where it's performing this computation off chain in a trust minimized manner using things like decentralization and different things. And then you prove what the computation that was performed off chain using a blockchain. And so you kind of get this where you kind of get similar guarantees to blockchain computation, but you get all this kind of customization and ability to add all these features that you can do off chain. And so I think we've seen this first with like provisioning data for use on blockchains. It's really an off-chain computation. When you're aggregating it off chain, you're first retrieving it, you're aggregating it, and then you're putting it on chain. We see this with randomness. We see this with now keepers and with cross-chain eventually. But I think really you're just building this generalized off-chain trust minimized off-chain computation environment. It's a lot of words, but that's probably the best way to describe it. I think this is really what's being created first and foremost. And if you have any thoughts there, but I think it's first important just to understand, like, what is Chainlink actually doing? It's not just data. It's not just this, it's like a generalized off-chain computation environment with trust minimized guarantees.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview. It's very precise in what's being achieved. I think if you wanted to like boil it down simply, I think it's pretty much Chainlink aims to provide everything that blockchains don't, but provide the similar properties that we come to expect from blockchains, basically. So it's like um, two pieces of a greater puzzle, basically. If you want to create a useful blockchain application, decentralized application, you need the ledger to settle it on and hand off private keys. And then you need the oracles for the expressiveness, the privacy, the connectivity, basically the inputs and outputs, and the computation itself, even to then settle on this ledger that handles the private keys and the settlement system. So it's kind of two parts that really work together. And what Chainlink is really aiming to provide, like you said, it's not just data, but it's any kind of off-chain service. So that's the data it provides. That could be off-chain computation, randomness, and that could be interactions between different systems, different blockchains, different off-chain systems. I think that Chainlink's approach generally has been historically to basically meet user demand and to preemptively meet user demand, basically. So, when Chainlink launched on mainnet 2019, DeFi wasn't really a thing there. It kind of was, but they launched Chainlink price feeds, and that really led to an explosion of all these different applications because you put price data on chain, you could build a DApp, a finance application around these tokens now. Kind of the same thing happened with NFTs where verifiable randomness came out, and then NFTs kind of blew up afterwards. And so there's kind of a correlation, and a lot of NFTs ended up using VRF to provably mint random NFTs. And I think we're kind of seeing the same thing here now. Cross-chain and multi-chain is really blowing up, and to kind of meet the user demand there, Chainlink will also be used for cross-chain interoperability protocol to kind of create and provide infrastructure to build more secure bridges than we've seen historically. So that's always kind of been the approach in my mind, that it's really about meeting user demand in a very pragmatic way. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts here, but that's always how I've kind of seen Chainlink's go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much, meeting, like you said, meeting market demand, trying to predict market demand. But again, I think really what it is like Chainlink's in this hyper growth stage where they're trying to build as many of these trust minimized off-chain services. Right now it's all about supporting smart contract applications. Okay, they need data, they need randomness, they need automation solutions. Now they need cross-chain, then they'll need fair sequencing, or they'll need deco for private attestations to private information, and like all these are kind of enabling smart contract applications. And I think how they're doing this is they're using the capital that's was allocated to them from the ICO to then expand and build these services, to subsidize these services so they can get in the hands of users. Because you got to understand too, like all these smart contract applications, like they're young, like they're just starting to grow out, and so it's like basically casting a super wide net to like anyone who needs off-chain services. And obviously not all those projects are gonna win out. So a lot of them are gonna fail, but some of them are gonna succeed big time. And you're basically creating the standard too of like, here's the standard way to get data on chain, here's the standard way to get randomness for gaming and NFTs, here's the standardized cross chain. So when you do get then all of this, all these enterprises and all these big movers coming in, well, they're just going to use what was already existed. Like enterprises actually don't really innovate so much in that regard. They're just going to use what's already been existed. So in this regard, they're basically kind of just gain market, basically become the standard in all these different areas of off-chain services, and then slowly add more and more services. And with that, you're just creating this massive environment for off-chain services. And from that, you're getting all these user fees that build up more and more and more. And that creates an economic model where, you can actually pay for all these different services. And then eventually you can introduce staking as a way to access those user fees and stuff. And like, I know for some people, this is more of a long-term approach. It's not like, where other projects, they have all this capital, they got allocated to them, and they basically just give people free money in the hopes that they'll be loyal, or that'll create such a network effect with liquidity that they'll be the standard. But I think we've seen that model has not really played out so well. And so, it's enticing for, users in the beginning, because they can, basically put money in a contract and earn some yield, but it's totally unsustainable. And it's not really a good business model for any project that's hoping to be around long term. And so, that's just the reality of what it is. But I think Chainlink model makes perfect sense. It's just not it's not the short-term speculation game that everyone is grown accustomed to, and it's hard to put that into a realistic perspective.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of points that I wanted to wanted to hit on here. I think that's, I mean, like you said, Chainlink's basically operating on a 10-year game plan here. People, a lot of projects in the ecosystem, and what Chainlink's competing against is flash in the pan type style things where they're going to give you all the money that they have currently. It doesn't really matter if they're going to be around in 10 years because people are going to rotate to the next thing. But Chainlink's wants to power the smart contract ecosystem when it's actually at scale. And so realistically, to do that, like you mentioned, it's about becoming the standard today so that when the inflection points hits, it's already well accepted that you need to use Chainlink for your smart contract application. And you don't become a standard by going out and extracting all the value today, where you charge people massive fees and maybe your network has notable revenue at the beginning, but you have no growth. And so, when the smart contract ecosystem expands, you're not competitive and you're not going to be used at scale. So it basically comes down to, why focus on extracting what little value there exists in smart contracts today? And I say little value relatively. I mean, the smart contract ecosystem has a few $100 billion in DeFi, but that's nothing compared to traditional finance. Like it's literally nothing compared to it. So it doesn't make sense to extract what little value there exists and compromise your future revenue opportunity, rather than the alternative of basically subsidizing user costs so that user costs are almost nothing at the beginning, attracting a huge network effect from all these different verticals. Some projects may fail, some may become, the next Aave. Basically lowering user costs so you generate this huge network effect. Then as the ecosystem itself expands and revenue opportunities of those dApps grow, Chainlink basically grows alongside that because it's powering the ecosystem the whole way through. And so by basically sacrificing short-term price action effectively through these subsidies, the bet is that as the smart contract ecosystem grows, by becoming a standard today and ensuring yourself to be a standard tomorrow, the future revenue opportunities are significant. And when we say tomorrow, it's not literally tomorrow. It's in a couple of years. And in crypto, that's basically perceived as being a couple decades. But this is realistically how you become a standard. You lower initial user costs, generate an economies of scale and network effect. Then you become basically irreplaceable at that stage. So then when the whole ecosystem scales up and billions of dollars a year in revenue are being generated, a significant portion of that flows to the oracles that are fundamentally required to make this happen in the first place. So it's very much a long-term play. And if you're just looking for a quick yield, then it doesn't really make much sense to be subsidizing user adoption rather than subsidizing your token holders, which is what a lot of projects tend to do in their approach. But Chainlink, when it deploys its subsidies, all about reinforcing the moat. How does Chainlink reinforce its position as the standard? The current revenue opportunities for token holders is non-existent currently, but with the implementation of staking and the scaling up of the ecosystem as a whole, generating a network effect and becoming the standard is hard, but tweaking the tokenomics in order to divert some of the future revenue to stakers is relatively an easier move. So in my mind, I think the approach being taken makes complete sense, but you kind of need a bit of a holistic approach, and you need to have a longer term time horizon than just the next year, which short term maybe not competitive, but long term, I can't see any other project realistically being here in 10 years besides Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Chainlink, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, just kind of furthering some of the points you had, it's very easy to change. Look, I think Ethereum is a perfect example. Their token economics were not that great for a while, and they changed them. And they were effective because they had a ton of users and they had a ton of user fees coming in. And I think, you actually have to have a product for the economics to make sense. In the, you could maybe do it in the short term if you just give all your money away, but then, everyone's going to leave, you have no product. To be effective, you have to build the product, and then, to tweak the economics is not that difficult. It's really not that difficult. And I think it makes sense too, because, staking is the next form of security and how you're going to be able to differentiate between nodes and stuff. And so, at the same time, if you're using all this money, you're basically using the money to introduce more revenue opportunities. You know, okay, let's support this dApp, let's support this new use case, let's support this new blockchain. Okay, that's bringing in more and more user fees. That's making a wider pool of user fees. And if you think about it, like, honestly, I mean, this is my opinion. I think Chainlink has one of the largest value captures in the whole space, because it could capture value from most apps on virtually any blockchain or L2, and even off-chain systems, which we haven't really got into, across many types of services. So they actually could use one dApp could use multiple services even, and like because like a so this has like a massive value capture potential, and I think we've already seen this, and this is just the beginning in my opinion, because I think generalized trust minimized off-chain compute is going to be like hugely valuable, beyond people might even run their whole applications just in this type of environment, and so I think that, like I said, I think the value capture potential is huge. I think the economics, I do think they need to take a step in that direction. But again, like, the opportunity is really there, and model makes sense. Whereas a lot of models, most models out there and products, they don't make sense. They're not sustainable. They don't make sense. They're, it's just like a quick flash in the pan, like you said. And so, you just have to, like you said, lengthen out your time horizon, whether you like that or not. It's just a reality. And so, like, make your own decisions based on that reality. But again, I'm excited for that, but might happen tonight, as they say. But again, I think we all know this, and so I'm excited about it, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the main thing is basically establishing yourself and expanding the future revenue opportunities. So when inflection point does hit, you're in a very good position. I think in general, there's a lot of focus on like the economics today need to be perfect. There needs to be all the revenue going to token holders. But like I kind of mentioned before, tokenomics is not the product. That's not what's being offered. It's the Oracle services, which then have revenue streams attached to that, which then can be diversified across to users. But realistically, the aggregate revenue from the crypto ecosystem, excluding, basically a couple like Ethereum, there's not a lot of revenue, because a lot of the revenue comes from the speculation casino games. And so it's not necessarily sustainable revenue. It's once we've reached the inflection point and there's actual real dominant real world use cases where the system of agreements that run the world shift to hybrid smart contracts, that's where the real revenue comes in. And that's where the tokenomics actually matter. But even then, the tokenomics is still not the product. It's the actual Oracle services being provided. So I think there's a lot of focus on the tokenomics. They're no doubtly important, particularly in the long run, but I think it's much more important to become the standard and have good services, because then you could do whatever you want with the tokenomics, but not the inverse without a product.
Yeah, I just want to add 2 points too. And I'm not saying, and I want to make clear that we're not saying that. I do think there should be a step in that direction of improving the economics. So I don't like people play, oh, you guys are just coping or something like that. Like, look, I'm just being realistic, but I do think there should be a step in that direction. And the other thing I was going to say too, and this is kind of it's more of a side point, but with Chainlink creating this kind of layer for trust minimized computation, I think what uniquely with Chainlink is that can actually support off-chain systems. So like you say you have like traditional web company and they want to add an element of trust minimization to their off-chain system, but they don't want to like build some blockchain application. Well, you could actually use an Oracle network to do that. Just like maybe you want to input data, or maybe you want to perform a certain type of computation just with an Oracle network. So there's this like unique value prop of not just supporting smart contract applications, but also like just supporting truly off-chain systems that want to add an element of trust minimization to their existing business process. And I think what would happen is if a business does that, well, then the competitors might want to do that, because like, hey, look, we're offering this guarantee that you don't actually get, with the other competitors. And it becomes like, well, I have to do that now because everyone else is doing that. And I think that's how people, because you can market around that. And especially when there's a lot of people who don't trust a lot of things today. And that just becomes then, okay, now I got to add more trust minimization. And like, this will be a property that will just like continue to be popular. It might take some time, or it might be more valuable in some areas than others, but this is something I think that's I see happening in the future more.
Yeah, I think that it kind of intertwines with like the Chainlink as a blockchain abstraction layer. I think that like a lot of the focus initially has been on like the DGen DeFi smart contract developer community. And I think as more institutions jump in, much more focus will be on the enterprise section. And like you said, there's a lot more opportunity with Chainlink for enterprise than just we bring data on chain. It's really Chainlink is the interface to blockchain networks, and Chainlink can introduce the properties of blockchains to your system without reinventing everything, just adding more determinism and more secure communication between existing off-chain serves off-chain businesses that exist. So there's
and transparency as well. I think you could just Oracle Network should just be about transparency, like posting proof of reserves or posting attestations to things like can literally just add transparency to your model.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's a massive future revenue opportunity and just a huge space of Chainlink that realistically it's stepped a little bit into with like proof reserve. But I think like the whole enterprises get onboarded to blockchains and Web3 through Chainlink. I think that like that in itself is a powerful narrative, and it's a powerful reinforcing network effect for the Chainlink ecosystem. Because once you get an institution to start using one of your products, then that institution using other Chainlink products or services rather, that's kind of a small step. You're already relying upon Chainlink network for one service. Now you can start expanding basically horizontally and start using other services. So it's like that's why casting a wide net is really powerful, because you just need to get one catch and then it just kind of spreads across and you can just expand horizontally, and that attracts more users. And so that's kind of like just a point on like the approach that Chainlink's been taking. But I do agree that it's basically there's a small contract community and there's the enterprise community, and both are huge target markets. The first has been explored in depth, I think, and now it's just about scaling the ecosystem. But the enterprise is just like that's the new field that hasn't really been touched by many projects. So that's kind of where I think there's a lot of future growth that hasn't necessarily occurred just yet. So I think those are generally, I think we've discussed some of the things on, I mean, we talk about Chainlink a lot, so there's only so many new things to discuss in this regard. But is there anything else you want to kind of cover in this regard, specifically about Chainlink and its place in the market?
I mean, no, I think it's just well placed. It's just, and it's doing the right things. It's just you're dealing in a market that's, kind of unrealistic at this point. And so, you just understand that reality and make decisions based on that reality. But I think most people agree it makes a lot of sense if you're actually trying to build a real product. And also, like, it's not like Chainlink is unique. I think most blue chip projects, are in a similar kind of pattern to some degree. I mean, Chainlink kind of obviously like did well earlier, but I think a lot of these projects are in a similar dynamic. So it's not like it's totally unique. I mean, Ethereum may be a little bit different since they kind of like they have their merge coming and they changed their token economic model a bit. And so, but for the most part, I think they're all kind of in a similar situation per se. But I mean, I don't think many people realize. I mean, I think most people realize how valuable Chainlink is in this regard. They just want to see the token economic model improve, and so hopefully that will improve and that will get some momentum going again.
Yeah, I think that all is. I think that's generally people's perception. I think that people are really, really focused on seeing the tokenomics improve, and I do agree that like the economics, taking a step towards the kind of the finalization of what the economics will be at scale is kind of a very good validation point. I think it's just, I think the priorities are kind of a little mixed given just the existing ecosystem and what Chainlink's competing against versus the differing timelines. So, but I do think Chainlink is like one of the most well-positioned projects in the ecosystem. And it's hard to think of besides just Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few others, just in terms of raw value the ecosystem provides. I mean, without Chainlink, most of the ecosystem just would not be the same state. I mean, we would still be dealing with Oracle tax and Oracle issues that were solved years ago by Chainlink. So I think at this stage, it's about scaling up what we have and kind of really bringing on the new markets that will scale the ecosystem up. But
yeah, I was gonna say I'm also pretty excited about the cross chain. just because I think people are like, oh, well, this got to market first, or this got to market first. And like the reality is that like, well, that's true. And that can be an advantage, you know, cross chain, because cross chain is not just like cross chain application. It's like, okay, here's an interface for some existing institutions to deploy like potentially trillions of dollars, and they're using yours to bridge to these different ecosystems and to take contract logic and deploy them across different chains, across different strategies. Like that is like a major opportunity and piece of infrastructure. And so like, you know, your yield farming rewards or your, you know, this or that is really nothing in comparison to the security that they're gonna want. And also you got to understand too that like institutions are looking for long-term relationships. So they start getting long-term relationships with infrastructure like Chainlink, you know, that's what they're gonna stick with. Like, there's like a huge opportunity there. It's not like they're gonna switch, and they want something that's gonna be around in 10 years. They don't want to like switch. There's a lot of people don't understand, like you don't want to rip and replace. You don't want to build something, connect with something, and then like, oh, I gotta change my whole infrastructure now because this project's no longer around. Like I think it's pretty obvious that Chainlink gonna be around for a long time. And I also think like, let's look at like keepers. Like, can one network support just keepers? Like, is there enough is there enough money to be made for just being a keeper network, or just being, you know, some small niche service, some small off-chain service? I don't really know that there will be. And then there's risk for a lot of these, not just enterprises, but dApps that they might have to rip and replace. You know, they have to replace with Chainlink because they went with the wrong model, and that costs money, that takes time. And so, you know, what's going to be around, and that doesn't even get into the actual economies of scale and network effects and all the features also that you can add upon your existing integrations. You know, I do keepers, okay, then I can add data with that. Maybe I want to use then cross chain down the line. Like you can do it, you have like one security model for all your different things. And I don't think people really realize the benefit in that regard. But anyways, I don't want to go too far into that, but my last point.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. We talked about earlier about the consolidation, like around dApps and blockchain infrastructure. This is kind of the same thing, the consolidation of off-chain services into one full stack solution that has, you know, it's infinitely configurable, that can provide all the services you need, a one-stop shop that you know is going to be around, you know, for the next decade. And, you know, every little startup providing their infrastructure, are they sustainable to be around in the next decade? You know, who knows? But Chainlink, with all the services and all the revenue, you know, it's going to be around for the next decade. And that's, if you go to Chainlink, you know, you're going to get the middleware you need for your applications, is kind of the way I see it. So I think in this podcast, we covered a lot of different things, a lot of the current ecosystem and its current state, how it's going to hopefully evolve over time, and maybe not so hopefully, but realistically how it'll evolve. And then specifically the strategy Chainlink is taking within the ecosystem and how its approach to scaling up to meet user demand and to continue fueling the ecosystem. And so, you know, the ecosystem today, the smart contract ecosystem, it's not perfect, but I think we're all kind of moving towards and hoping that we'll see these more real world use cases start to play out. And kind of the bet from Chainlink's perspective and kind of what Chainlink is, that Chainlink's going to fuel these real world applications essentially. So I think it's all kind of intertwined. I think we're kind of during this lull period, but I think a lot of these use cases are going to be played out going into the future. So just to kind of end things off, I want to say thanks for listening. I think it's been almost 2 hours of us kind of discussing these different topics. If you want to learn more about just smart contracts, oracles, specifically Chainlink, of course, and just the ecosystem in general, then I recommend following me on Twitter at ChainLinkGod, and then following my co-host here as well, the Crypto Oracle, on Twitter. You'll always find some good alpha and good resources posted there. So once again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.